Jodie, thank you so much for that. That
You're
was
welcome.
so wonderful.
Oh,
It's
he's
wonderful
such
to
a
be
good
here.
guy.
So, look, let's start right at the end and get that stuff done of Shoes and Prey, and then we're going to go right back to the beginning and some of the fun times that we had as you set up the business. So right at the end, I mean, I was on the other end of the phone call, literally just seeing the financing side of it.
Yeah.
But talk through a little bit from the finance, because you guys were, this wasn't just, we'll let this fail.
No.
You guys were flat out trying to find more capital, trying to make it happen. Talk a little bit about sort of some of those phone calls and how they felt and what was actually happening behind the scenes.
Sure, 100%. So what we had done was we had, actually for the first time ever, we had always done our own capital raises. And for the first time ever, we actually engaged an investment bank out of New York. And they were awesome people. And actually, Laurent from Ohana & Co. became one of my first ports of call because he just got so intimately connected to each of the parts of our business and understanding, and I really respected the way he was thinking. So he was, so we engaged them to run a dual track process with us of fundraising or potentially selling the business. And then in amongst all of that too, you probably remember, I was out there hunting for those big whale customers. So because we were offering our services to other labels so that we could use our on-demand manufacturing to provide their inventory, so they had a more inventory-less model. I was going through China, working with department stores there. I was having meetings through Hong Kong with some of the major department stores there, through the US, with companies that actually built brands for a living and then sold those brands on. So looking for those really big funnel customers, as well as looking for ways to sort of push that traction on the business to consumer part of it with the fitting. So there were so many irons in the fire to push on, and I know they might sound like many, but honestly, like when you get to that stage where you can see that end of your runway and you have the capacity to push on a few things to check for that traction, optionality really is one of the best things that you can offer. And optionality serves not only making sure that you have explored every single thing, but also make sure that you're, by your investors as well, providing the best chance to understand what that next step might look like. Because if any one of those gains traction, then that becomes a platform for you to raise the next round off of.
Yeah. All right, let's go back to the very beginning.
All right.
The very beginning. So there were 3 founders.
Yes.
Talk a bit about the founding group. You know, you guys had known each other for a long time.
We had.
And how you sort of, that moment of we're going to start Shoes and Prey.
Sure. Okay, so once upon a time, there were 2 Michaels and a Jodie. One was my husband, and we divorced partway through. Great chapter in the book about working with your ex. Who works with their partner? Anyone? Yeah, lots of stuff in there for you guys. Wasn't the business that broke us up. You're going to be fine. So Michael and Mike, my 2 co-founders. So Mike had been, he'd studied engineering and law. Michael had studied commerce and law, and I had done international business and law. They ultimately ended up at Google, and Mike was in developing software. Michael was in sales, and specifically he had a lot to do with e-commerce businesses. He'd worked at Supercheap Auto during one of their major growth phases as well. And then I'd been in advertising, learning about branding, and I'd been a lawyer as well. So
sounds like the perfect mix.
I know, except none of us knew how to make a pair of shoes. So I had been traveling and I had heard about this shop in Hong Kong where you could design your own shoes. And I was like, that sounds like it has me written all over it. So I went to visit the store. In 1.5 hours, I designed 14 pairs of shoes. Come on, as if you wouldn't. And I had the time of my life doing it. And when I came back, my girlfriends were like, oh, where'd they come from? I explained. They asked if I could make something for them. I did. And then I remember it was Christmas time, and Michael and I were hanging out at the beach. And we'd been kind of kicking this around the night before with Michael's family, and they just read a book called The Purple Cow by Seth Godin. And basic premise is that if you create something interesting enough, people will talk about it. So, you know, if you like went past a field and there was a purple cow in it, like, tell me you're not going to Instagram that, right? So that was part of the whole thing of really looking for that word of mouth right from the very beginning. It was ingrained into the type of idea that we wanted to pursue. So they'd finished reading that. They'd started seeing traction with their e-commerce clients and thought, hey, maybe we should be looking at e-commerce. We just need this idea. And so we'd be kicking it around the night before and come up with this design your own shoes online, and then we were chatting with Mike about it the next day, and we were like, yeah, there might be something to that. Yeah.
And that's how it started.
That's the very genesis moment at Broad Beach on the Gold Coast.
Nice, great. So you spent 2 and a bit years bootstrapping.
Yes.
Obviously it costs money to start a business like this and to start making shoes.
Yep.
Where did you find the money?
Well, it was not in my mattress. So the way that we did it was that we had between us a whole lot of life savings. And for Michael and I at that point in time, we thought that those life savings were for a house deposit.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've heard this story before.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a common story.
Totally. And, you know, I think that this was probably my first major interaction with the fear of failure, because, okay, let's say we take all this money and put it into this business that, I don't know, like, I mean, it was really funny talking to my parents. They're like, so you're going to start a website? I was like, yeah, it's going to be great. So took this money for that. And, you know, there were lots of other fears around it as well. Like, you know, God, like, I'm doing really well in my career. If I step out of that for a while, does that mean that I won't get my foothold back? You know, what if I'm terrible at this and I end up, you know, losing all my money? And I was like, no, like, I know how to add up. I know how P&Ls work. We're going to be okay. And then there was also just this, like, niggling thing of, oh, can I really do this? And then the thing that helped me to get over that was my friends and family, actually. Like, being able to know that there were people I could pick up the phone to who would, you know, if I had a tough day, they would be like, all right, if I made a bad decision, they'd be the people that would go, look, you're generally pretty smart. That was a bad decision, but keep going. Or, yeah, it sucks that you had to do that today, but that was important for the business, so keep going. So having those kinds of things really helped me to face into the fear of failure, make the decision to go ahead. Also, really liking Maggi 2-minute noodles is really helpful. Like, we really just pared back all of our spending. I would make coffee at home. We'd never buy coffee out. And we just got really frugal. If I was going to buy clothes, you know, it was very rarely, and even then it was fast fashion on sale. And, you know, we just got really focused about channeling all of our resources into that for 2.5 years.
So 2.5 years in, the company is sort of profitable. You've sold, you know, a lot of shoes.
Yep.
Why? What made you think you wanted to take venture capital? Why raise capital?
There's this amazing firm called Blackbird. Okay.
We weren't even around at that stage. It was before Blackbird.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. But listen, there are a couple of things, and I think the really big decision around this is your mindset choice, first and foremost. Entrepreneurs come in all different shapes and sizes. Entrepreneurs are mum and dad that have a fruit shop, and it's also the people who take investment to become a unicorn, you know, well, with that vision in mind, or to grow, you know, into an extraordinary company with hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue every year. So I think that at the very beginning, Michael and I had the talk about, okay, if we're going to start a company together, what kind of company are we striving to build? And we decided early on that we wanted to build the big disruptive company. Then, thinking about those kind of elements that I was talking about before, so we had the desire to do that. We had a concept that was getting traction, that had low customer acquisition costs. We had so many things that we could test that felt like low-hanging fruit to be able to grow really strongly year on year. So that sort of feels like something that's worth putting money into to scale. And so really that's where the meeting of minds came between us and opening up conversations with venture capital.
So there's a good question on Slido here, which is that, you know, where would you be if you didn't take venture capital, do you think now? Like, would the business still be around? Would it be worthwhile?
Yeah.
You know, if you hadn't supercharged it by raising all this capital, ramping up costs?
Yeah.
Trying to go faster?
Yeah, so look, the answer is maybe. Because the business was performing well in a niche, it meant that it could have grown sustainably into being a strong business, but not a really massive business. But there's absolutely no way that we could have known that without going on this journey to do this testing. And I'm not sure if you would agree with this, but my opinion is that that's kind of what we all sign up for when we work with venture capital. We sign up to try and crack that really big, awesome market and that big idea. And knowing that we had really consciously made that decision at the beginning, I don't regret it. And you know, I do think that there is, and that's why seeing the assets go into liquidation and knowing that it might start again. Look, honestly, like I have so many mixed emotions about it, but I do think that that could turn into a beautiful, sustainable business.
Let's talk about a few of the fun times at Shoes and Prey, because there were some really amazing times. A few of them. So you guys tried a whole load of different marketing techniques, channels, TV ads. Yep. I remember there was a lift involved in a TV ad, an opening, and the shoes. There was radio. There were shoe parties where people would get together.
Not to be mistaken for Tupperware parties. There were shoe parties.
Shoe parties. Talk a little bit about sort of that process of trying, so many different customer acquisition channels.
Sure.
Or, how you guys approach that, and how people in the audience should think about, those sorts of channels.
Yeah. So the way that we approached it was we really looked at what our customers were asking us about, where the gaps were in terms of if you think about the whole customer journey from I want to buy a pair of shoes, or I'm messing around and I've just stumbled across shoes that I think I might love and I might want to buy. Like, you map that whole journey and then you kind of look at where you might want to target within that. And then learning about what our customer, where they were spending time online, where they were just in terms of spending time when they were wandering around in shops. We used all of that data to try and pick what we wanted to do, because each of those different marketing channels have a different objective. Some of them are very measurable, like our search engine marketing. If we were investing in Facebook and doing lookalike targeting to gain people that we could then acquire and then give messaging to put them into a funnel for sales. Maybe it was catching people at a certain moment when they're searching keywords, which we all know about, of course. And then there were the more immeasurable things with the TV and radio advertising. So they're measurable to a point, right? So depending on what part of the journey we were focusing on, it depended on what marketing channel we would go for. But in particular with the stores, one of the key reasons that we ended up doing offline retail was, you would have seen in the research, as I mentioned, hey, we want to see you in mass market distribution. We want to see you in places that we are. The other thing was that one of the unanimous strong messages out of our surveys was people saying, I haven't bought a pair of shoes yet because I just want to know what they look like in real life. And I was like, well, that's the thing. We don't make them till you order them. So that's kind of the trick with this. So we ended up understanding that to mean that they actually wanted to see what the shoe felt like on their foot. Maybe you guys relate. Sometimes you just want to try it on and make sure, because all shoes fit like a little bit differently. You want to check that the materials are good and all this kind of stuff. So that's kind of what drove us into deciding to open a store, so that we could offer that. And then it seemed to be proving out at the time with a lot of different brands, like Bonobos going into Nordstrom, where they'd seen an awesome halo effect into their online retail from opening offline stores.
Yeah, there was this theory that the offline store was almost like a giant billboard, right? That would hopefully would make money as well, but really was like a big ad.
So that's exactly the words that we used in our board meetings. I love that you remember that. Yeah, exactly. Absolutely.
So, one of the highlights, of course, was Nordstrom picking Shoes and Prey up and then rolling out through the Nordstrom stores. Talk a little bit about that process. I mean, we had a wonderful time going to Seattle for the very first opening of Shoes and Prey. I'd like everyone to know that I bought the very first pair of shoes for my wife, who's in the audience, from the Seattle store.
Yeah.
But talk about that sort of time, because that was a really amazing time too.
It was so unbelievable, and I have to say that finding a partner like Nordstrom, they were phenomenal to work with. Not only so they're based in Seattle, that's where their headquarters are, and guys, like, their head of shoes was down with us on the floor the day that store opened, picking up little pieces and making sure everything was in its place with us. They were so hands-on and genuinely caring about what was happening, and I remember one of the Nordstrom brothers coming past and saying, that toe box looks a little small. Now, the toe box is this part of the shoe here, like the space that your toes go into. And like literally nobody else would know something that technical about a shoe. And just to be able to open up a conversation around it. They ended up investing in Shoes of Prey as well in one of our later rounds. And they were an amazing partner. But the cool thing about opening these stores was just, we opened one store in November 2014, and then we opened 5 stores over a 10-week period in 2015. And it ended up being this thing that we colloquially called the Roadshow. And honestly, guys, it was one of the best times of my life. It was so busy, and there was like a crew of us that would pour into these hotels in like DC or New Jersey or wherever we were opening the store, and it would be this furious working, where, okay, you're across the event, who's coming to the event, have we spoken to this person? And someone else going, oh my god, the shoe flower didn't arrive here, we're gonna have to look at it, and can someone build a shoe flower? And figuring out all these little technical things. How's the tech going? Are we integrated into the POS system properly? Why isn't the music playing? There's a scent that's supposed to pump through the store, I don't smell that scent, where is it? But alongside all of that, having these beautiful moments of such, intensity of work, but with the best people who were just striving so phenomenally to get this done in a short period of time. And, even when we got back to the office, that sort of culture and sense of the Roadshow really permeated a lot of the office itself, and was an experience I will never, ever, ever forget.
LA, I'm going to talk about now.
Oh, yeah.
You moved to LA. There was actually, it wasn't always going to be LA. You looked at lots of different places.
Yeah.
Where did you look, and why did you choose LA?
So this is like a slightly controversial question, because I wanted New York. But I promise it's not just because I love New York. It's because we built out all of these matrices, which you probably remember, to figure out why we should be where in the United States. We looked at Seattle, we looked at San Francisco, we looked at LA, and we looked at New York. I think we might have also considered Austin at one point as well, kind of all the major hubs. We were looking for places that had already a lot of talent drawn into them from other sort of big e-commerce companies. We were looking at places that would align time zone wise with our factory in China. We were looking at places where we could have the best networks for succeeding and going on to our next step. So New York had a lot of the fashion consumer kind of stuff. San Francisco had a lot of venture capital and sort of people who were very early adopters for ideas like ours. We were weighing up all of these pros and cons the whole way to decide where we would go. We ended up in LA because Silicon Beach, because the environment was very similar to Sydney, so an easy move. But the primary reason that we went there was because of time zones. It was really easy for us to cross over with our factory in China, which was, honestly, guys, critical. It was also really easy for us to have a short flight to any of our investors in San Fran, somewhere in New York as well. And it was a quick flight up to Seattle to spend time with Nordstrom. So we were kind of trying to put ourselves in the middle of all of that.
And what was it like moving to LA? Imagine, out in the audience we've got Australian and New Zealand founders there. Woo! And, thinking about, what happens when you just move 20 people to a new city in the US? How do you deal with that sort of initial phase, and how did everyone feel?
It's a huge, huge deal, and something that there's a lot of human capital involved in it. And what I mean by that is you just kind of see your team trying to show up and do everything every day like they normally do, but they've kind of got this administrative weight sitting on their heads of trying to think through all the stuff they've got to get done to make that move happen from here to, in our case, Sydney, to Los Angeles. So one of the things I did that I actually published in the book was we created a checklist for everybody of all the things that you need to do and the things that you need to apply for in the order that they come in the US. I admit it might be out of date, but it might provide you with a bit of a starting place if you are thinking of moving a team. So that was a really big deal, and we also went that bit further to make sure that we had engaged, shown them where to get access to, if there were things outside of the regular immigration things we were helping with, that they knew where those sources of information were. We organised a container for everyone to put their stuff in to ship over all at once. We rented a place that kind of became the house that everyone stayed in for the first month as they were looking for places to stay. So it wasn't perfect, but it certainly softened that administrative burden that was so distracting to driving the company forward.
So off the screen there, if you could go back 5 years, what would you do differently?
Oh, wow.
It's a very open-ended question.
Yeah. Honestly, I don't know that we could have made different decisions. I really do believe that we robustly analysed the data that was sitting in front of us and made not only good decisions, but really good executional work against those decisions. So I'm not sure that I would change anything in that respect. Maybe one thing would be looking at the way that we were analysing what people were doing to an even greater extent. Because ultimately what we were asking people to do was have this huge psychological shift with us about how they bought shoes. And I think when anyone is trying to do that in a company, it's a very, very challenging thing. But also it might have given us a little bit more openness to just serving up a shoe that we know that you're going to like, as opposed to asking you to doing all the design if we had sort of analysed that type of data. But again, I don't know that we could have foreseen those types of things. I really do believe, and believe me, I've done a lot of reflecting in writing this book, that we were doing as much as we could possibly understand to do at any given moment.
So the top one now is how did you handle telling your investors that you were going to shut down, and was it news to them?
No.
I know the answer to that. It wasn't news to us.
Yeah, so I said, do you want to answer?
Yeah, I mean, you guys were keeping us in the loop all the way along.
Yeah, I think, and I think it sort of connects to what I was saying earlier. You know, there are kind of 3, 4 maybe parties you need to manage in that situation. One's your staff, one's your investors, one's your customers, and one's yourself. During that time, we were very conscious of making sure that our investors knew what we were doing, when we were doing it, and where we were at in a very transparent way. There was no point in dressing it up. And one of the reasons, there's 2 reasons actually not to dress it up with your investors. One of them is that if you were going to get follow-on funding in a situation like that, it's going to come from your current investor group. And then the other thing is that these guys have the best connections, depending on how you've chosen the people to fund you. But we always chose people who had great connections and were really intelligent, had great exposure to other like businesses. So if you want to see a brains trust at work at the time you need it most, that's the time. And so I can't see any reason to not be upfront and honest in sharing that information along the way. The last thing is, who wants that kind of surprise? And that's when things could potentially get nasty because, you do have your duties as a director to make sure that you're sharing certain information. And honestly, we overshared information, but I also think that meant that we were on the journey firmly together.
I want to talk a little bit about the process of writing the book. What's it like to write a book?
Wow.
Were you sitting at your desk alone, tapping away? Was this a sort of, did you do hours on end? Did you do short bursts? How did you write it?
I did both. So a couple of things. I'm a procrastinator and I love kicking off and doing big things, but I'm not great at the details. So it is phenomenal that I wrote a book. And it was a mix of those things. So the thing that took me the longest was cracking the concept properly about how to share the story. And then I sort of got into the craft of actually writing and getting all those anecdotes out and figuring out how they came together. I reread so many emails. I reread all of our posts. I went back to all my old YouTube scripts, just to really jog what it felt like at that time. Wiley had been talking to me about a book for about 2 to 3 years, and so sometimes I wrote as things were happening, and so that's where you kind of get those really visceral, emotional moments, particularly towards the end of the book as well, because they really were written on the days that they were occurring. The journey was kind of, and I would spend hours doing it, and then I would, some days I just needed to step away from it and digest it. But the most interesting thing about writing the book was that until it got sent to the printer, I never actually thought about other people reading it. I thought about all the things that I wanted to share, of course, like in terms of, oh my God, I wish I'd known this. Oh my God, like that lesson. Oh, who knew that it felt like this? You know, am I normal? Am I not normal? And I knew that I wanted to share all of that with people like you. But you know, I'm equally as terrified of no one reading it as I am of everyone reading it, because there is so much very raw stuff in there about what the journey was like.
Well, I think to finish off, I just want to say thank you so much for today. It's been so special to have you here. At Blackbird, we are so proud that we backed you guys. As you might know, we've backed Michael, one of your co-founders. We literally yesterday invested in his new company.
If you're press, hold off on that for a minute, I think.
Oh, yeah, no one's supposed to say that. No one knows what the company is.
Okay, you're good.
And you know, I really hope you do start a new business, because we'd love to back your new business. I think on behalf of everyone today, it's been just so wonderful having you here today. Thank you so much.